I don't know about you, Damichael Cole, but I got that dog in me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I am going to show each and every one of you what it means to be not just a player of a podcaster, but a hooper of a podcaster. We are going to talk about the difference between just regular basketball players and guys that got that dog in them, that are hoopers, that know how to play the game the right way. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Oh, oh, oh. That's me because I got that dog in me, Damichael. I don't know if you heard that bark or not, but that wasn't an animal.
That's your bark, Joe.
I didn't get a pet. I know that was a very convincing dog bark. And for those of you on YouTube, you already knew that it was me making the noise. But if you're listening wherever you get your podcasts, you're like, oh my God, did Joe get a dog? And he didn't tell us? No, that was just me showing that I've got that dog in me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, formerly of Bluff City Media. Maybe that's why I'm formerly of Bluff City Media, because I do things like that. Formerly of SB Nation, formerly of all sorts of places, exclusively for now of Locked On Grizzlies. And I'm very happy to be here with my co-host, not exclusively. He works over at the Commercial Appeal, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. But we are happy to have Damichael Cole with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies as well. As I mentioned a moment ago, before I embarrass myself, we are free and available wherever you get podcasts. You can also check us out on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all of those wonderful things. And this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Damichael, because of the random strangeness of the NBA in-season tournament, there's still no Memphis Grizzlies basketball. It's been a couple of days in December, and the Grizzlies haven't played. Totally logical. But anyway, I'm curious as to your stance on this, because obviously I'm being a bit facetious with the dog and the hooper and that sort of stuff. And I'm willing to acknowledge that I'm fairly lame, right? I think we can all agree that I am not cool.
I think you're a pretty cool guy.
And we've talked about this before. Don't patronize me, Damichael Cole. You know that I'm old and washed, and people watching this, if they're looking for a reason to watch that involves being cool, it's Damichael Cole. If they're looking for a reason to be mad on the internet on a day that ends in Y, they check out whatever I'm doing when it talks to the Memphis Grizzlies. But I do think that this is an excellent opportunity, me putting my sarcasm aside, to kind of talk about some of the discourse that's been going on amongst Grizzlies fans. This idea of a hooper, Jalen Noel kind of gets the brunt of this. But in fairness to Jalen Noel, before him, there was Marshawn Brooks, right? Before him, there was Lance Stevenson. Before him, there's Tyreek Evans. There's numerous examples. And a lot of it kind of goes back to the analytical debate versus, the just normal playing of basketball. That there's definitely something still there amongst basketball fans in this 2023 era of the NBA game, where analytics has kind of been accepted now. But at the same time, that is something that a large section of not just the Grizzlies fans, but NBA fans at large are hesitant to accept, right? I think that's fair to say. And Carmelo Anthony kind of stands out in my mind as a guy that a lot of folks would say is a hooper, but maybe if you look at his numbers, there are certain seasons that he wasn't the most efficient scorer. And you can go up and down the list of all of these different things. Jalen Noel is just the latest. What's that?
I said, you're on the money.
Jalen Noel is the latest example of that for the Memphis Grizzlies. And, I'm not going to explain myself in terms of why I react the way I do to things, because I know my social media accounts and I know the things that get said to me in terms of wanting to move on from players like Luke Kennard and things like that. The ridiculousness of this conversation is in the fact, not that Jalen Noel is a hooper. It's in the idea that this is a 10-day contract player who is going to supplant somebody who has a full rotation spot and has had that for several years on NBA franchises. So that's kind of the macro view of it. But I want to get back to the micro, Damichael, because again, you're cooler than me. You understand. For me, I don't care if they're a hooper, a baller, a player. I want them to put the ball in the basket, and I want them to stop it from being scored as often as possible, right? That's the purpose of the game. But I do think that there is a disconnect among Grizzlies fans and basketball fans in general in terms of the style points of getting to that place.
Yeah, and the disconnect comes because the word hooper has kind of been phrased as a cultural term. Before I talk about it, I want to tie it all back into why we're talking about this as it correlates or relates to the Memphis Grizzlies.
This is a Grizzlies podcast, after all.
This is a Grizzlies podcast. And the conversation is about, some people thinking that the Grizzlies need more hoopers. They have too many quote unquote basketball players, need more hoopers. That doesn't make sense to some people. Basketball player, hooper, they all dribble, they all travel, they all score the same points. That's my guy, Joe Mullinax over there. He doesn't care if you're a basketball or a hooper. If you're good, put him on the team.
That's me.
I get it. I get the idea. I think that all teams should have a quote unquote hooper. Some of you may say, well, what's a hooper? A hooper, for lack of better terms here, I think it's you kind of laid it out perfectly. You don't think about the analytics when you're talking about hoopers. You don't think about efficiency. It's not about them, the most efficient guys in the world. When we think of some of the best hoopers to ever step on the floor, Carmelo Anthony, Allen Iverson, those are some of the names that come to mind. But when you think of hoopers, you think of guys who bring juice to the floor. Think of guys that carry that swagger that kind of translates all the way throughout the roster. They bring that extra oomph, as some people like to call it. And that's what you get from hoopers. Because this whole hooper term, if you've been watching basketball over 30 years, you didn't hear hooper back then. Hooper really didn't become a thing until the and one days of basketball. And that was because if you were a fan of and one basketball, which someone like myself was.
But see, I was too. Like Skip to my Lou, that was my guy.
Skip to my Lou, that's a hooper. That's a hooper. He ended up making the hooper. He ended up making the NBA as Rayford Austin, but he was a hooper. And the thing is, a lot of those and one guys didn't make the NBA. And there are a lot of quote unquote hoopers around the world right now, averaging 25 plus points per game overseas, but they're not quote unquote basketball players that are in the league. What's the whole basketball player thing? Yeah, a little bit less flash. Guys who probably cut well, they're spot up shooters, the things like that. Basically, a lot of what the Grizzlies have on the roster. When you think of hoopers, think shot creators, think guys with the flash, the behind the back passes, the guys who just can bring that extra juice. And that's kind of what Jalen Noel is bringing to a certain degree with the Grizzlies. That's kind of why he's been brought up in this conversation. But getting back to what I said originally, I think you do need a couple of those guys on the roster because you need someone when the game's on the line. The hooper is the guy you probably want to get the ball to and to kind of close the game out. But at the end of the day, it's good basketball players. But this isn't just a term amongst fans and things like that. Desmond Bane, when we talk about basketball players all the time, he's the one guy. When we're talking about guys, he specifically differentiates. He'll say me, that guy, that's a hooper. Desmond Bane, for example, he calls himself a hooper. Says, I'm a hooper. He doesn't say I'm a basketball player. So this isn't just some lamest terms that's among fans and things like that. This is a cultural basketball thing that everybody kind of follows. But tying it back to the Grizzlies, Joe, I do think that the Grizzlies have needed a couple more of those guys who bring that juice. Couple like Derrick Rose, that's a hooper. Derrick Rose, if you watch the Grizzlies in these first few games, he's been this close to like crossing over like 4 or 5 dudes. And me and Dez were talking about it in the locker room one day, and Dez was like, "Yeah, he's just yanking guys all over the floor." And I'm like, "Yeah, somebody's gonna fall sooner or later." Like when that happens, look at the bench. The bench is going to get up. They're going to be celebrating. Like, it just brings that juice. And the Grizzlies have needed more of those guys instead of the just typical good pass, high five, get back on defense type guys,
Okay, so let's close this conversation out with a lightning round of Hooper or not Hooper. Okay,
let's do it.
I'll give you the name, and you decide if they're a Hooper or not Hooper. Because I feel like in the first part of this show, everybody listening and watching can agree I am not a Hooper. Okay, so we can, you can be our Hooper expert, Damichael. So here we go. Ja Morant, Hooper or not Hooper?
That's a Hooper.
Okay. See, I gave you a softball there for the first one. Here's another softball type question. Mike Muscala, center for the Washington Wizards.
That's a
Hooper
basketball player.
Or not Hooper? Okay, that's a basketball player.
Really good basketball player.
Okay. All right. So I feel like I gave you the warm-up ones. Here's some more difficult questions. Jaren Jackson Jr., Hooper or basketball player?
I'm going to call Jaren a Hooper. He got a little pizzazz to his game. He's a Hooper. Okay. That's a tough one, but he's a Hooper. I'll call him a Hooper.
See, you say that the Grizzlies need more Hoopers, but apparently Ja, Bane, and Jaren are all Hoopers. So, I mean, I don't know.
That's the top of the roster.
How about Dillon Brooks, Hooper or basketball player?
Dillon Brooks, early Dillon Brooks, first couple years of the Grizzlies, straight up Hooper.
Okay.
The Utah Jazz series, that was a Hooper.
Mm.
Last couple years, basketball player.
Interesting.
Smaller role now. Houston Dillon Brooks, basketball player. Defense, don't do too much. Dillon Brooks, early Dillon Brooks, that was a Hooper.
Okay, and we'll close out with this one. Mike Conley, Hooper or basketball player?
Basketball player. Fundamentally sound. This is the key. Fundamentally sound. Makes all the right plays. Basketball players. Not going to cross too many guys over. Doesn't have too many moves in the bag like that. So, as a shot creator.
So I think I'm starting to understand now. There's guys that you would want in a pickup game at the Y maybe, or, at the playground. And those guys are Hoopers.
There you go.
If you're trying to win the Pac-10 or Pac-12 championship, I just dated myself, the Pac-12 championship, or if you're trying to win the illustrious, prestigious NBA Cup, maybe you're more interested in basketball players.
Think of it like this, too. If you want someone to play for the old running Rebels of UNLV or the Fab Five in Michigan, you're looking for Hoopers.
Gotcha.
But if you want Tony Bennett's Virginia's team with Malcolm Brogdon in the back cuts in the pack line defense, you need basketball players.
So using that logic, is Steph Curry a Hooper or a basketball player?
Steph Curry is a Hooper.
But when I think of Golden State, I think back cuts. I think things like that.
You also should think making Chris Paul fall a couple times and all the behind the back, the crazy passes. He's a Hooper.
All right. I learned a lot. I'm going to be dead honest, and I'm not being sarcastic at all. I've learned. So thank you to Michael. I do feel better.
Clay is the basketball player.
Clay is the basketball player.
There you go.
Okay. That maybe that's where I missed it a little bit. All right. Fair enough. Well, I feel better educated. Hopefully our audience does as well. And again, I'm being dead serious about that. Another piece of basketball lingo that has become more popular in recent years is the idea of a dawg, not D-O-G, D-A-W-G. Vince Williams Jr. has got that dog in him, and we're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. He might have a full-time contract with him here soon enough. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Again, as the weather gets colder, FanDuel is getting hotter. Can't stress enough the great fun that you can have over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's right. You heard me correctly. $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time than right now to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including things like spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. What are you waiting for? Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and continue to grind through the NBA season, but also get into the nuts and bolts of the NFL with FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Vince Williams Jr. has impressed. Is there a spot in the rotation for him once everybody is close to healthy? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Make sure you're following him on X at Damichael C. He's the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. I have written in several spots over at Bluff City Media, Grizzly Bear Blues, SB Nation, Fan Sided. Regardless of where you come to us from, however you're checking out the show, Damichael and I are most appreciative. I want to make sure that I shout out Locked On's first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel over on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Vince Williams Jr., Damichael, is he a hooper or a basketball player?
I think he's more of a basketball player, but guess what?
He's a good basketball player. He's got that dog in him.
He's got that dog in him, Joe.
Am I allowed to bark, or am I still on barking timeout?
You can bark all you want. You can bark all you want on Locked On Grizzlies.
Yes, that's what I like to hear, because Grizzlies don't bark. But anyway, all jokes aside, Vince Williams Jr., a Virginia guy, right? I'm a Virginia guy. Vince Williams Jr. from VCU has been playing very well for the Memphis Grizzlies. And when all of these conversations about Jalen Noel happen, again, a lot of it's in jest with me. I see him as the 10-day contract that he is. I'm glad the Grizzlies signed him for a second 10-day. I think that was smart. I also think, like you said on yesterday's show, once that contract expires, nothing's going to happen. Right? He'll just go about his business. Maybe he'll get another 10-day contract with another NBA team as the season goes on. And, everything will continue to play out as the team gets healthier. Vince Williams Jr. is on a two-way deal. So he's a guy who may spend a lot more time in South Haven with the Memphis Hustle, the G League team, but he's at least in the program, right? He's on the roster for the Grizzlies. To me, the conversation shouldn't be, do you move on from someone else or make a move on the roster for Jalen Noel? I would argue that you do for Vince Williams Jr. what you did for Kenneth Lofton Jr. last year, and consider making him a full-time roster member as this process is preparing to unfold with the return of Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard, John Morant. There's going to be some roster movement. I'm a Vince Williams Jr. guy. If people really like Jalen Noel, I really like Vince Williams Jr. He combines defense with three-point shooting. He has tremendous energy. He's like a hybrid of DeAnthony Melton, and I see a little bit of Matt Barnes in his game, which might seem a little bit random and off the beaten path. But it's more so the tenacity, the aggression. Like he very much is hard-nosed to the grindstone, and I feel like if you combine those two guys, you've got a pretty good NBA player potentially.
I don't want to get ahead of myself here when I say this, because people, will run with this when I say it. But you just threw out a couple, pretty solid basketball players when you thought of Vince. But there's another guy that comes to mind for me, and I'm not saying he is him, but you know what I'm about to say.
I do, and I purposely avoided it.
He gives me some first team vibes now. It's look, it's not the on ball defense as much as it is his tenacity as a rebounder. Tony Allen, we saw it. I mean, he was so ferocious as a wing rebounder, where you felt if he was battling Tim Duncan, there was a 50-50 ball. And that's the vibes that I kind of get from Vince Williams. The defense, I mean, we're Kobe said that TA was probably the best individual defender he went against. It's not that area. It's more of just because to me he's a better rebounder than John Conchar, and John Conchar has gotten a lot of credit, for his ability to rebound.
Near elite as a rebounder on the wing. All the numbers back that up.
And Vince Williams is a level above that, in my opinion. He's tough. You mentioned Kenneth Lofton Jr. last year, right? Got a guaranteed contract towards the end of the season, last regular season game, and the idea was the Grizzlies needed more depth in the center, in the front court with all the injuries going into the playoffs. He didn't play in the rotation in the playoff series against the Los Angeles Lakers. The difference is right now, with the way this roster is constructed, barring some trade deadline move or whatever, I don't see how Vince Williams is not on the floor in the playoffs. I mean, we saw him guard Kevin Durant. We've seen him guard, Devin Booker in stretches. We've seen him guard pretty much the best player on opposing teams. Kyrie Irving, he pretty much wiped Kyrie Irving out in that Mavs game. Now, granted, the Grizzlies were face guarding them, and that kind of played a role in it. But still, he's 6'6" with this 7-foot massive wingspan. When it looks like he's out of a play, he can get back into it with those long arms, crashing the glass. He's not afraid to shoot. When he's open, it's going up, and he shoots it really well. That left-handed stroke is really good from him. I like this guy, and this is the thing. I've liked Vince Williams for a while now. I mean, going back to Summer League, I think we talked about him in Summer League, and the thing is, because people say, well, why did it take the Grizzlies so long? If you go down all these guys, the picks and whatnot, Jake LaRavia, David Roddy, that whole class with Vince Williams, the difference, I think, with Vince Williams is he has areas in his games that are clear weaknesses where it's like they could get exposed. But with the Grizzlies, those weaknesses don't get exposed because they're not asking them to do those things. For example, Vince Williams is probably the worst playmaker on the team amongst the wings.
He may be the worst dribbler on the team, period. And I don't want to, Bismack Biyombo might have more struggles, but Vince does not have the best handle.
We'll just say amongst the wings, it's very clear. So that is a very clear weakness as a game. If he is a better dribbler or playmaker or handler of the basketball, that's a first round pick with some of the other assets that he has in his game because of his inability to dribble and things like that or create. He's not much of a shot creator. He's much spot up shooting, crash the glass real hard, and competes his tail off on the defensive end. But guess what? The Grizzlies don't need him playing in pick and rolls. The Grizzlies don't need him, saying, hey, we need you to be our secondary playmaker. No, go stand in the corner. And if the shot goes up, go crash, get the offensive board, or knock down the three-pointer if the ball comes your way. Get back on defense and go lock that guy up. That's his role here. It's perfect for his skill set. Getting back to my original point, you think of Dave Riley, Jake LaRavia, and those guys. His skill set just complements these other guys as well or potentially better. I mean, Jake LaRavia, we don't know what he is defensively. We've always said he has the potential to be a really good shooter, but, I mean, we haven't seen it yet. You see it in the G League numbers, but we haven't seen it here with the Grizzlies. David Roddy has been solid. I think he is kind of put himself in this rotation. But with Vince Williams, you know exactly what you're going to get every game, and that's all you can ask for right now.
We threw a lot of names out there, while you were talking and describing what he's good at. Maybe the best compliment we can pay him is like a PJ Tucker kind of situation where you're not going to ask PJ Tucker to create as the ball handler in a pick and roll set, right? That's not what you're going to ask PJ Tucker to do. You're going to ask him to shoot threes and play undersized front court minutes. And maybe Vince Williams. Think about the potential defensively, especially, of a Morant, Bane, Smart, Williams Jr., Jaren Jackson Jr. lineup.
I'm one step ahead of you.
That to me,
he can guard fours.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I would have at this stage, and this is going to sound really weird to say, this could vary. You correct me if you think this is recency bias. I see Vince being a 4 more than I see Jaren being a 5 right now. Maybe in terms of ceiling. I
like him as a 3.
I like him as a 3 better too. I'm talking about if I had to place a bet today, who can do this? Can Vince Williams Jr. be a 4 or can Jaren Jackson Jr. be a 5?
I'm with you.
I'm betting on Vince Williams Jr. being a 4.
I'm with you because of the rebounding.
Correct.
Because of the 7-foot wingspan. I'm with you. I mean, a lot of versatility to his game.
But I agree keeping him on the perimeter right now. I'm talking about long term, which is the point of this conversation. Does he deserve a full roster contract? And again, they're going to have to make some tough calls in the next couple of weeks. It might be a time to pull the Band-Aid off, so to speak. And speaking of Band-Aids, Damichael and I are both, on the Vince Williams Jr. train. There's a train that we used to be on that might be leaving the station, and we'll be talking about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at Game Time. Game Time is a phenomenal app, highly recommended. I would suggest that you check it out as soon as possible if you've not already done so, because of all the tremendous deals that you can get access to via Game Time. They do tickets, ticket sales, finding things in terms of flash deals, zone deals, last-minute tickets, views from seats, and a lowest price guarantee. All that adds up to you not having to worry about where you're buying your tickets from for the next big event. Killer last-minute deals, like I mentioned, all-in prices. You get everything out of the ticket purchasing process except for getting the tickets themselves. Take the guesswork once more out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Shout out to Game Time one more time. Make sure you are using the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off over at Game Time. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Ziaire Williams. Is it time to say maybe the dream is dead? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, closing out this Tuesday edition of the show. I am Joe Mullinax, joined by Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He writes on the Memphis Grizzlies as the beat writer for that publication. I am formerly of Bluff City Media and Grizzly Bear Blues and SB Nation and Fansided. Lots of different bylines. Between the two of us, you've come to the right place for Memphis Grizzlies content. We've talked about hoopers. We've talked about dogs. Let's talk about dreams deferred maybe a little bit here to get a little poetic at the end of our show on this Tuesday. You and I are big fans of Ziaire Williams. I remain a big fan of Ziaire Williams. I think we have to remember how young he is. Context matters in terms of his development, what happened in Stanford during the COVID season, all those sorts of things. However, we are getting larger sample sizes here, Damichael. And when you look at the advanced numbers, the on-off net rating data, there is one guy on the Memphis Grizzlies who isn't just bad, he's atrocious. And it's Ziaire Williams. There is not really anybody that he thrives alongside right now in terms of the numbers. They've improved some as the team has kind of gotten back to the mean, especially defensively. But again, there's going to be tough decisions that have to be made. We can't argue for Vince Williams Jr. and then, well, whose spot is he going to take? To me, at this stage, that spot should belong to Ziaire Williams. That doesn't necessarily mean he needs to be traded. Doesn't necessarily mean that he needs to be moved on from in that particular way. But it's hard for me to look at this team when Marcus Smart is back, when Luke Kennard is back, and say that Ziaire should get that run over Vince Williams Jr. at this stage.
And that's the way it's been in the last couple games that they both have played together. Vince Williams being more of that seventh man who comes in after Jalen Noel, and Ziaire Williams has been kind of a ninth man, in the rotation. And that's kind of, that's where it is. And I don't expect that to change. If we look at the landscape right now, where some of these guys are supposed to come back, I think maybe Marcus, Luke, whoever comes back first, might come back the same day. But when one of those guys are inserted, I don't expect it to be Vince Williams to be the guy who's moved out of the rotation. If it comes down to choosing one or the other between, Ziaire or Vince, I think it will be Ziaire. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. He just has a more definitive skill set. Basically, Ziaire, we think more potential. You just said it with the age and he's still really young. Like, we don't say any of those things with Vince. Like, we're not going to say any of those things with Vince because at this point, we know what he brings to the table. He's going to get out there. He's going to defend. He's going to rebound. And if you leave him open, you're going to pay. With Ziaire Williams, if you leave him open, depends on what day of the week it is, if he's going to make you pay. We know he's going to run the floor. But the Grizzlies, as a team, have not been getting out in transition, which is why Ziaire Williams just a couple games ago just got his first alley-oop of the entire season. This was a regular occurrence for Ziaire, at one point, but first alley-oop of the season. So now that the Grizzlies aren't having as much transition success with fast breaks, he's not having as much success in those situations. Defensively, he's good, I think, but he's good against certain type of scorers, as I've said in the past. He's good against more of those movement guys. Think of him guarding a Duncan Robinson, a Buddy Hield, those type guys. But if you put him on Luka, I don't like your chances. And I don't like anyone's chances with Luka, but there are certain guys where I go into that matchup, I say, okay, instead of getting 40 put on you today, I might get 30 or I might get 25. And, he's not one of those guys. I think, yeah. And Joe, it's tough to say this because I don't want to be that guy. But, Joe, I was watching the Pelicans the other day, right?
I know where you're going with this.
I was watching Trey Murphy's first game back. Joe, the man played 22 minutes, scored 18 points, made 4 threes, and threw down a one-hand tomahawk dunk.
Yeah, he sure did.
And I'm looking at that, and I'm like, man, first game back, first game of the season, 22 minutes, that's all he needed? 18. Man, it's looking tough for Ziaire right now.
And in future episodes of Locked On Grizzlies, we talk about this roster movement that's coming and what forms it may take. To the Detroit Pistons, Ziaire Williams not being as good right now will mean nothing, right? The Grizzlies' opponent in tomorrow's game. They could maybe take a swing on a lottery talent and explore what that trade market might look like.
There's potential still there. I still think the right
I agree.
He can unlock some things.
I agree completely. And we've seen evidence of Detroit using the mid-range a little bit more with Monty Williams and things like that. So I think that there's possibility there for Ziaire still. I'm just becoming less and less convinced it will come in Memphis, Tennessee. But we'll see in the days and weeks that follow leading up to the returns of Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard and, of course, Ja Morant. Thank you guys so much for checking out Locked On Grizzlies wherever you're doing so, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things. Friendly reminder about our amazing new opportunity over at YouTube for Locked On, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Locked On Sports Today is there for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On like Damichael and myself, plus our national shows covering each and every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. Subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. The next time that we're together, Damichael, it will be a game day. We'll have some actual basketball to discuss. Take a look at the Detroit Pistons. It's a bit of a game where you would expect Memphis to win, which is fun to say, right? Because of the current state of play for Detroit being so bad and the Grizzlies playing better. But again, Memphis, even with these couple of days off, if they take anything for granted, they can lose to anybody. And the Pistons still have a lot of NBA players on their roster last time I checked.
They do. And I was looking at this the other day, and not only do they have NBA players, they have guys that can potentially produce. And one guy that stands out to me is Bojan Bogdanovic. He has not been healthy. They got him back. First game, 22 points. Like, they looked better. So it'll be fun to kind of break this down. We'll get more into it on tomorrow.
That dude can score. That dude can flat out score. And, maybe is Bogdanovic a hooper?
Yeah.
So. There you go.
He's a hooper.
Shout out to European hoopers. I like that.
Yeah.
I mean, Doncic has to be a hooper, right?
Oh,
I mean, Luka's,
that's
he's
a cold-blooded hooper, right?
Yeah, very clearly a hooper. What about Wembanyama? Is he a hooper or is he a basketball player?
He's going to be a hooper,
Okay.
He's learning right now, and Popovich kind of has him on the training wheels. But he definitely is going to be a hooper. Like, you see all the crossovers, the handles, and he'll be a hooper before it's said and done.
Make sure you guys let us know who you think are hoopers and basketball players in the comments, especially on YouTube. We like to go, or at least I like to go and check out, interact every once in a while with our wonderful YouTube commenters. So maybe let us know, hooper versus basketball player, your thoughts on that conversation that Damichael and I had. On this episode, we'll talk Grizzlies Detroit. On our next edition, the Grizzlies will be practicing on Tuesday, I would imagine. So Damichael will have some information from practice and all that sort of thing coming out of today's practice, going into our Wednesday edition of the show. For Damichael Cole, I'm Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll catch you tomorrow here on Locked On Grizzlies. Thanks again. Have a good one.